Matthew drove calmly down a rural road, the sound of the car engine blending with the tranquility of the countryside around him. The wind gently flowed through the open windows, and he relished that moment of serenity following his retirement. The expansive green fields and the distant chirping of birds offered him a rare peace, something he had begun to appreciate more and more as the years went by. There was nothing to expect in his day, and in a way that was comforting. Suddenly something caught his eye on the shoulder of the road. In the distance, Matthew spotted a small skeletal figure. As he got closer, what he had initially mistaken for a wild animal revealed itself to be a dog. The animal was thin, dirty, its matted fur a tangled mess, and its expression conveyed exhaustion. It looked at the approaching car with suspicion, but didn't move. Matthew slowed down and, without thinking twice, parked the car beside the animal. There was something in that gaze that stirred him in an unexpected way. He felt a deep empathy, an impulse to help that he couldn't ignore. Matthew got out of the car slowly, his feet sinking slightly into the ground as he walked toward the dog. The animal, initially hesitant, remained still, watching every movement of Matthew with caution. "Hey, buddy. It's okay," Matthew murmured in a soft voice, trying not to frighten him. He crouched a few meters from the dog, extending his hand, waiting for the animal to decide for himself whether to trust him. Time seemed to slow in that moment. The dog stayed still for what felt like a long minute, but then, with slow steps, he approached, lowering his head as if he knew that this was the only gesture of hope left to him. Matthew smiled faintly, extending his other hand to pet the dog's dirty and tangled fur. He could feel every bone beneath the coat, and that moved him even more. The animal had clearly been abandoned for a long time, but something in its expression still held a flicker of trust. "You're safe now," Matthew said in a reassuring tone. Without much thought, he opened the back door of the car, and to his surprise, the dog, with a bit of hesitation, climbed in. There was fatigue in the animal's eyes, but also a sense of acceptance, as if he could finally find some rest. Matthew carefully closed the door and returned to the driver's seat, his heart racing faster than usual. What was he doing? He didn't know anything about this dog, but something inside him felt that this encounter was not by chance. On the way home, Matthew glanced occasionally in the rearview mirror. The dog was lying down with his eyes half closed, but he seemed calmer. Once home, Matthew brought him inside, improvising a comfortable bed with some old towels. He watched the animal rest, trying to imagine what kind of life he had led up to that point. "I think I'll call you Buddy," Matthew said softly, as if testing the name. The dog, though exhausted, perked up his ears slightly, as if the name resonated with him somehow. The first few days were an adjustment period. Buddy was a calm dog, but clearly traumatized. He ate slowly, as if each meal could be his last. Matthew dedicated himself to caring for him, giving him baths, feeding him, and providing as much comfort as possible. Gradually, the dog began to trust him, following Matthew around the house, always with an attentive gaze. Over time, Matthew realized that his own routine had changed. Buddy's presence brought a new energy to the environment. Where once there had been silence and a monotony he hardly noticed, now there was life. The sound of Buddy's paws echoing on the floor, the simple joy of watching him run in the yard or lie in the sun. Matthew, who had spent years accustomed to solitude, began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time, a real connection, a renewed purpose. Buddy seemed to transform each day. The initial distrust gave way to a growing friendship. The dog began to wait for Matthew at the door every time he left, and their nights were filled with the loyal companion by his side on the couch. Matthew couldn't help but think how that small act of stopping his car on some random road had completely transformed his life. He now had a routine that motivated him, something that made him get up each day with more energy. Buddy, in turn, appeared increasingly comfortable. His once dim gaze now sparkled with a quiet joy. He was a loyal dog, always attentive to Matthew's movements, and somehow the bond between them had grown much deeper than Matthew could have ever imagined. One day, during one of their walks in the park, something unexpected happened. Matthew, as usual, was walking with Buddy by his side. He was spending time with Ella, his granddaughter, a lively child who loved to run freely across the lawn. Ella and Buddy had gotten along well since their first meeting, and the dog showed a special affection for her. As usual, Ella was darting back and forth, but distracted by a butterfly, she ventured farther away than she should have. Matthew was chatting with someone else and didn't notice how far the girl had wandered. However, Buddy, ever watchful, immediately followed Ella's footsteps. Buddy was gradually adjusting to his new life. His eyes, which once reflected a past of hunger and abandonment, began to shine with a tranquility that only those who feel secure can possess. Matthew's home, once silent and methodically organized, now pulsed with the lively and unpredictable presence of the dog. At first, Buddy was reserved, surveying every corner of the space as if trying to understand where he truly was. But as the days went by, Matthew noticed small signs that Buddy was starting to relax. Matthew was preparing coffee when he noticed Buddy lying beside him, his head resting on his paws, watching him closely. There was something comforting in that. The loneliness he felt after retirement began to dissipate, like a cloud slowly fading away to reveal the sun. He now had company for his long morning walks, someone who waited at the door with a joyful look, eager to run across the open fields. This brought new meaning to his mornings. The streets of the neighborhood, which he knew by heart, seemed different when seen through the new perspective Buddy brought. More than just a companion, Matthew found a reason to get up every day. The dog not only filled the void in his home, but also renewed the sense of purpose that seemed to have slipped away over the years. Caring for Buddy, ensuring he was well fed, healthy, and happy, became his personal mission. And in some way, this rejuvenated him. The household routine adjusted to this new dynamic, and Buddy, with his laid-back demeanor, found a home where he could finally relax. He settled into the most unusual spots. Once, Matthew found him sleeping under the dining table, curled up as if wanting to disappear from the world. At other times, the dog followed him around the house like a quiet and loyal shadow. But what surprised Matthew the most was the lightness that Buddy brought to his days. Simple things, like the way the dog wagged his tail, or the clumsy way he stretched on the living room carpet, made Matthew smile more than he could remember doing in years. Their companionship brought a joy he hadn't realized was missing. Buddy was more than just a dog. There was something profound about his presence, something that seemed to respond to a need Matthew hadn't even known he had. On the quietest nights, while they both rested on the couch, Buddy lying next to him, Matthew found himself reflecting on how unexpected this change had been. Previously, he viewed retirement as the end of a phase of his life, a time for relaxation, but also a certain boredom. Now with Buddy, there was always something to do, a reason to leave the house, a presence that encouraged him to live more fully. The daily walks with Buddy were not just a form of exercise, they were moments of reconnecting with the world around him. People he barely knew began to greet him, enchanted by Buddy's energy, which attracted smiles and attention wherever they went. Matthew realized that even his social interactions had increased, all thanks to the dog's natural charisma. One day, while heading out for a walk, he realized something even deeper. His own posture had changed. He walked more confidently, his chest open, like someone who had something valuable to share with the world. And he knew that all of this was because of Buddy. That simple decision to stop the car by the side of the road had irrevocably transformed both their lives. As he watched the dog run freely in the park, Matthew smiled, remembering how it all began. He didn't know how he had arrived at this point, but he was grateful. Grateful for the companionship, grateful for the life that had been injected back into his days. Buddy seemed to have a special sensitivity, as if he understood exactly what Matthew needed, whether it was a comforting look, a gentle lick, or simply being nearby in silence. Over time, Ella, Matthew's granddaughter, began to visit him more often. The little girl, with curious eyes and curly hair, loved to chase after Buddy, who always showed an uncommon patience. To Buddy, Ella was like an extension of Matthew, someone he felt he needed to protect and care for. The connection between them was immediate. Matthew watched, smiling, as the two ran through the garden, Buddy closely following Ella, always attentive. There was something about that dog that he couldn't explain, a depth to his intelligence that went beyond the behavior of an ordinary dog. Buddy seemed to understand every nuance of the situation, as if he knew when to play and when to become a vigilant guardian. It was on one of those days, while Matthew relaxed on a park bench watching Ella play with Buddy, that something unexpected happened. The little girl, distracted by a colorful butterfly fluttering in circles before her, began to wander away slowly. She ran, laughing, trying to catch the insect, oblivious to the fact that she was straying too far. Matthew, engaged in conversation, didn't immediately notice how far Ella had gone. However, Buddy, ever watchful, did. The dog quickly rose, his eyes fixed on the direction of the girl, as if sensing something was amiss. Without hesitation, he began to follow Ella, keeping a safe distance but attentive to her every movement. When Matthew finally looked around and noticed that Ella was no longer nearby, his heart raced. He suddenly stood up, scanning the area with anxious eyes. That's when he saw Buddy in the distance, walking alongside Ella, guiding her back to the right path as if he had taken on the role of a shepherd. Matthew let out a sigh of relief as he watched Buddy leading Ella back, the little girl still enchanted by the butterfly that now floated ahead of them. When the two approached, he crouched down to greet his granddaughter, who ran into his arms, smiling and completely unaware of the danger she had just faced. But Matthew knew all too well what could have happened. The park was vast, with dense trees and paths stretching as far as the eye could see. If Ella had gone out of sight, it could have been something much more serious. "Are you okay?" he asked, still a bit shaky, as he lovingly ran his fingers through her hair. "I was chasing the butterfly, Grandpa," Ella replied, with the typical innocence of a child, not realizing the worry she had caused. Matthew looked at Buddy, who stood next to the girl as if waiting for instructions. The dog seemed to instinctively understand the gravity of the situation. He wagged his tail slightly, but didn't seem interested in playing. He knew he had just protected someone important to Matthew, filling the man's heart with silent gratitude. "Thank you, Buddy," he murmured, almost inaudibly, reaching down to pet the dog's snout, which Buddy accepted calmly. Buddy had already become an essential part of Matthew's life, but at that moment, the man realized something even deeper. The dog was not just there to keep him company. Buddy had a protective instinct and an intelligence that transcended that of an ordinary animal. There was something in his behavior, in his watchful gaze, that hinted at a past Matthew still didn't fully understand. In the days that followed, the incident at the park replayed in his mind. How did Buddy know how to act so quickly? How did he seem to sense danger before Matthew even noticed? The bond between them had never been stronger, but there was something about Buddy's past that started to pique Matthew's curiosity. Buddy, for his part, continued to demonstrate his loyalty and vigilance. Each day he seemed more at ease in the house, but he never stopped monitoring the surroundings and the people approaching Matthew. During their walks, Matthew began to notice that Buddy always kept a careful pace, as if analyzing every movement around him, alert to any signs of risk. Then, during a stroll in the park, something unexpected happened again. As Matthew and Buddy walked leisurely, a man approached them. He had an expression of surprise mixed with disbelief. His eyes locked onto Buddy as if he were seeing a ghost. "It can't be," the man murmured, not quite believing what he was seeing. He stopped a few meters away, his eyes wide. Matthew looked at the stranger in confusion, trying to understand what was happening. The man took a hesitant step forward and then called out the name Buddy knew from before. "Max, is that you, boy?" Buddy perked up at the sound of the name, something inside him recognizing that voice. He looked at the man with an attentiveness Matthew had never witnessed before. Matthew watched in silence as the man, with eyes brimming with emotion, knelt down, extending his hands toward the dog, who hesitated but eventually moved closer. "I've searched for you everywhere," the man said, his voice cracking with the emotion he tried to hold back. "I thought I'd lost you forever." Matthew stepped forward, unsure exactly how to react to the situation. "Do you know Buddy?" he asked, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in his voice. The man looked up at Matthew, still kneeling beside the dog. "I do know him, yes, but his name is not Buddy. His name is Max. He was my rescue dog." The revelation hit Matthew like a punch. A rescue dog? He looked at Buddy, or Max as the man had called him, with a new perspective. Suddenly, everything made sense. The intelligence, the protective instinct, the constant vigilance. It wasn't just ordinary loyalty, it was training. Matthew felt a lump in his throat as he realized there was so much more to this dog's story than he had imagined. The man stood up, still keeping his hands on Buddy, who now looked between the two men as if trying to understand what was happening. "My name is Wyatt," the man said. "Max and I worked together. He was a rescue dog, specialized in locating missing children. He was the best at what he did, until during a mission we got separated. I searched for him for months, but never found him again. I thought he was dead." Matthew didn't know what to say. He looked at Buddy, or Max as Wyatt continued to call him, and felt a mix of pride and sadness. Pride in knowing that this dog, whom he loved so much, had saved lives before coming to him, and sadness in realizing that Buddy, or Max, had a past life, one that perhaps he should never have had to leave behind. I didn't know," Matthew began, his voice thick with emotion. "I found him on the road. He was so thin and hurt. I had no idea where he came from or who he was. I just knew he needed help." Wyatt nodded, understanding. He looked at Buddy with a mix of gratitude and pain in his eyes. He always had a big heart, and it seems he's still saving lives. Wyatt gave a bittersweet smile before turning his gaze back to Matthew. "He saved my life many times, and it looks like he continues to do so wherever he goes." Matthew fell silent for a moment, processing everything he had just heard. Buddy, Max, wasn't just any dog. He was a hero, an animal that dedicated his life to rescuing and protecting, and somehow, fate had brought that hero to him. Wyatt took a deep breath and then, with a firm look, made a proposal that Matthew never expected to hear. "I know that Max has found a new home with you, and I don't want to take that away from you, but I think he still has so much to offer. Maybe we can give him the chance to keep helping, whether in new missions or training other dogs. He's too special to stop now." Matthew looked at Buddy, who, with attentive eyes, seemed to understand every word. There was a decision to be made, and Matthew knew it was a difficult choice. He remained silent for a moment, processing what Wyatt had just said. He looked at Buddy, or Max as Wyatt insisted on calling him, and felt a mix of emotions. Over the months, that dog had become more than just a companion to him. Buddy had brought life to his home, given him a new reason to live, and in a way, had become a reflection of the transformation Matthew was also experiencing. The thought of losing that bond, or having to share it with a past he didn't know deeply, unsettled him. Yet Matthew couldn't ignore what Buddy had already done for him and his family. The act of protecting Ella in the park was proof that the instinct to rescue was still deeply ingrained in that dog. He wasn't just an ordinary pet, he was a hero, and heroes don't stop acting simply because they find a new life. Buddy, or Max, had a greater purpose. Wyatt stood patiently, observing Matthew's silence, clearly aware of the weight of the decision before him. He wouldn't push the issue and respected the bond Matthew had created with Buddy. Even so, it was impossible to deny that this dog still had so much to offer. Finally, Matthew took a deep breath and broke the silence. "I didn't know that Buddy, or Max, had this life before he found me. I just saw a dog in need and did what I thought was right," he said, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "Now, I know he has so much more to give. He saved my granddaughter Ella, and I will never forget that. Maybe it was fate that brought him to us, but I also can't be selfish." He looked at Buddy, who was watching him with deep, attentive eyes. "If he can still help more people, save more lives, I can't be the one to stop him from doing that." Wyatt gave a small smile, understanding Matthew's internal struggle. He stepped closer and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "You did the right thing by saving Max, Matthew. You gave him a home, and that is something invaluable. But what you're suggesting now is even greater. You're giving him the chance to continue being the hero he always was." Matthew nodded slowly. It wasn't easy, but he knew this was the right decision. "I think we can find a way," he finally said. "I don't want Buddy to go away. He's a part of my life now, but if he can continue to help in some way, I accept that." Wyatt smiled, relieved. "Maybe he can go back to doing what he did best, saving lives. We can arrange for him to participate in some missions, or if you prefer, he can train other dogs. He has so much to teach, and I know there are others who can learn from him." Matthew felt his heart warm at hearing that. The idea of Buddy continuing to help, without it meaning a definitive separation, comforted him. He knew that, in some way, the dog still had an important role to play in the world, and he was willing to support him in that. Buddy, lying beside the two men, watched the interaction with the serenity of one who knew he was where he needed to be. He seemed to sense that an important decision had been made, but as always he was ready for anything, as long as he was by Matthew's side. The following days were filled with new conversations between Matthew and Wyatt. They discussed how Buddy could contribute again, whether as an active rescue dog or by training others. Matthew still spent his mornings walking with Buddy, but now there was a new sense of purpose in his steps. Buddy was preparing for a new phase in his life, and Matthew couldn't be prouder. A few weeks later, Buddy had his first participation in a training session for new rescue dogs. Matthew watched from a distance as Buddy, with the confidence and wisdom of a veteran, guided the younger ones, showing them how to react in emergency situations. It was something incredible to witness. Matthew felt immense pride as he watched Buddy work. Even without words, he knew that this dog had been destined for great things from the start. Matthew also no longer felt alone. Retirement, which had once seemed like a period of stagnation, was now filled with new challenges and adventures. Buddy hadn't just transformed his life, he had given Matthew a renewed sense of purpose. The day ended with Matthew and Buddy together, as always, both tired but satisfied. The house was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes from having found one's place in the world. Matthew stroked Buddy, who rested his head on Matthew's lap, his eyes closed in contentment. "You're really a hero," Matthew whispered, a soft smile on his face. Buddy didn't respond, of course, but the man knew that the dog felt how much he was loved and respected. There were more adventures to come, more challenges to be faced, and Matthew knew that with Buddy by his side he could tackle any of them. The two were now connected not just by the love of an owner for his dog, but by a mutual understanding that they had found each other at the exact moment they both needed it most. We hope you enjoyed this narrative. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more emotional stories that touch the soul. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think, and feedback is always welcome. We'll see you in the next exciting video. Until then.